mainly though regarding Latin American urban policy. So I try to mix the two things with this presentation, specifically applying it to a game that was formative in my experience as a preteen. So as you can see this screen here, you have Professor Oak in Pokemon Crystal, which is part of the second generation of games, essentially asking players their gender. So are you a boy or are you a girl? Which I know for many people, for many young people, this was probably the first time in a video game that they got this type of choice. It was definitely for me. So just a quick background here. So Pokemon Crystal was released in Japan in the year 2000. This is part of the second generation of Pokemon games. One of the enhanced games. So similar to the first generation, we had red, blue, and green. Then you had yellow as the enhanced version. Crystal was that for the second generation, which, as I stated previously, had for the first time in the series, it allowed players to. So I mean, it's a very simple choice. It's really between, are you going to be a boy or a girl? It's not much, really. Nothing actually changes in the gameplay besides your player avatar, but you know, these things though, depending on your cultural background and where you live, can have at least for me, had a very, very big effect on my life. So just to quote Samuel Tobin here, he identifies in his essay Masculinity, Maturity, and the End of Pokemon. One of the problems that Pokemon represents for growing boys is the cuteness of monsters and the mythos. Cute suggests not only for children but also for girls and women. And he goes on in that same essay to say that a prepubescent boy's attraction to something cute is likely to be something to be as a warning sign to heteronormative teachers, parents, and peers. So here lies the conflict, at least for me, when it came to this game. I love Pokemon. I was all into Pokemania, completely obsessed. And my parents, specifically my father, who was the one who was the breadwinner and would buy me a lot of this stuff. With this game, it became a conflict. So my background being of Latin America, I was born in the Dominican Republic, an immigrant to the United States. My father being self-described macho. So what is machismo, right? And being a macho. So this is a fairly, I mean, it's a very old, ancient way of self-identifying for males, dating back, to talking centuries in Iberian Peninsula, roots in ancient Rome. But the actual term of machismo, as some of you are familiar with, it's actually less than a century old. Things became in common use around like the 1930s, 1940s. One of the earliest examples of this is actually in Octavio Paz's seminal work, El Laberinto de la Soledad, or The Labyrinth of Solitude, which was released in 1950, which is essentially like this grand treatise of Mexican history and the effects of, and which in it Paz lays out what he considers are the main characteristics of machismo and how it affects Mexican culture. Now, this is applicable, I think, to a lot of what people from Latin America. I mean, machismo is not a monolith by any sense of the word, but there are common trends, and I picked three from Paz here. So the first being so a macho must never show weakness or emotion in the face of adversity. If they show weakness, they become less than a man, right? The second being they wield power to dominate others, especially those that they consider weak, which weak tends to really represent women or anything feminine. So an effeminate man or someone who essentially is not involved in anything manly, such as sports or physical activity, etc. The third being, and this one's interesting here, which is this is according to Paz, disdain for intellectual endeavors that are not practical. So it's all right if you have an intellectual endeavor when it comes to your work. Let's say if you're a mechanic, finding out like different parts of a car and mastering that, but outside of that, this can be a problem. And just so machismo, it's a very big deal in Latin American culture. I think sometimes it's overemphasized, but it's still very, it's a prevalent factor. So according to Hurtado and Sina, a recent book, very excellent, titled Beyond Machismo, which they talk about so how machismo in the popular imaginary has become just a social signifier of all that is male chauvinism. And even outside of Latin American culture, you start seeing that word being used around for male chauvinisms in the United States, in other parts of Europe, etc. So for me, being a self-identified, cis, Latin man, the social expectations and familial pressures for me were that I would have to be a macho, not only because of a cultural duty, but also as a means of survival within the United States, right? Within this new culture that was very different, very individualist driven, unlike more of like our family oriented communal life in the Dominican Republic. So with Pokemon Crystal, though, I was able to assume a role of somebody that not fit that type easily, if at all. So the clash that I had with the machista patriarchal culture adhered to by my father was very stark, and it's sometimes traumatic, and thus though through this though I was able to get a specific perspective on just gender relations that I think otherwise I just would not have encountered. So just a little context though of games prior to Pokemon Crystal, popular games specifically that allowed you. So Street Fighter 2, right? Chun-Li, probably the most famous female character in video games as a medium. So I played this game prior to playing Pokemon Crystal, but this game is odd in the sense that though you're playing a female character, Chun-Li is still playing a boy's games, right? Like you're fighting, you have the physical violence, etc. Even to the point that when the character was designed, it's very like her music is very feminine, and also she was kind of made more powerful in the initial version of the game than others, which actually led to a lot of players, even people who didn't want to play as the quote unquote girl, choosing her because they wanted to win. And this reminds me of a personal anecdote that even my father, when he would see me play this game, he would always say, "Oh, esa mujer es fuerte," right? Like that woman's really strong. Which is something that I think's the only time I ever heard him utter that sentence, and it's for like a video game character. And just because I know some people are aware of this, and I also want to make this clear, Dragon Quest, which is the most formal influence on the Pokemon series, did choose between the two gender binaries, right? Like first off in Dragon Quest 3, which was released 12 years before Pokemon Crystal, and then Dragon Quest 4, which is an incredible game. And this one, the choice was a little bit more drastic in the sense of design, and there are some dialogue options that change depending in this one too. But what makes Pokemon Crystal unique is that it really is like a quote unquote degendered way of playing. Besides it's almost like your avatar is almost like a different T-shirt that you wear to go outside, like between a plain blue T-shirt and a plain red T-shirt. And this is going to be interpreted somewhat literally, as that's the two different colors from the two player sprites. So just so per the manual of Pokemon Crystal, which I have here, you can see how it says briefly that just, select your gender. Selecting one gender or the other will not change the story. The only way to change the gender is to start a brand new game. So you have to also stick by that choice. And given, if any of you are familiar with this game, you have like one memory slot. You're playing that game. You essentially have to commit to that. And Pokemon also is a very social game. I mean, you can play it solitaire, but one of the big takeaways is if you own a link cable and you have another friend with a Game Boy and a copy of one of the games, you can battle and trade Pokemon. As you can see, this is some these two pictures on the top right, top left here. They're taken from the Japanese commercial of Pokemon, of the first two Pokemon games there. So you see just how sociability was something that was at the forefront of the games. It's something when the games were designed, this was a game that was supposed to be played by a diverse group of people. Thus, you have, going back here, you have just like the range of Pokemon. Now here, this is up to the second generation, so there's 251 Pokemon, but they run the gamut from what Ito would, as Ito described as, kokei, which is cool, or kawaii, cute monster designs. And because you had to choose 6 Pokemon in your main party, you were most likely mix and match. Like, I like cool Pokemon, like Charizard, but one of my favorite Pokemons was Blissey, which is in the bottom left corner. It's just like, it's very cute. Just looking at it puts a smile on my face. And just to refer to Ito a little bit regarding one of the amazing things about Pokemon, as a franchise and as a phenomenon, right? How it broke new ground by its hybridizing styles and gameplay that cross gender lines. It's as I stated before, you had all these different like selections of monsters, which now is expanded to over like 1,000 Pokemon now. And through its mechanics, it's also hybrid through its mechanics. So you have competitive battling between monsters, as well as like dimensions of pet care, nurturing, and social networking, which I guess Ito considers more feminine overtones. So I'll just quickly give this quick difference between these games here and my father. So going by Paz's definition of macho or machismo, right? You have it here. My father personally was somebody who, yes, the way that he presented himself and discussed like who he was somebody who never showed weakness at any point. As well as when it came to, he was always somebody that was willing to will his power to dominate others. And he didn't have, though, a disdain for intellect endeavors. Though one of the main things for me as being in the States was he was always big on like, you have to get your education, you have to read, and that's a way that you can be better than the previous generation. Street Fighter 2, for example, Street Fighter 2, it is a game where the gameplay wise, you have to, you can't really show weakness when you're playing, in the sense of you have to be good at the game, and you have to just literally, you can't have any openings when you're trying to strike, because then the other player can strike and you can end up losing. Pokemon Crystal, I mean, it's turn-based. It's something it doesn't fit that neatly. It doesn't really fit that. For the second, wielding power, Street Fighter, yes and no as well, because you can, you can choose then to just have like a training session, right? Or even teach someone. In Pokemon Crystal as well, when you're battling, obviously you want to have the stronger Pokemon and win, but there's other things you can do in the game as well. It's not exclusively to battling. And then even if you are battling, you can also lose and just give it another try, and eventually get better. And obviously, when it comes to disdain for intellectual endeavors, when it comes to something like Pokemon Crystal, it's like, no, like this game, if you're not a nerd before this game, you're gonna be one, because you're gonna just do the process of it. You're gonna learn all the Pokemon types, etc. And as we've seen with the previous excellent presentations, right, there's so much you can take from the game as well. outside of just like the initial battling and collecting gym badges. So just to conclude here, so I always choose the female character, which is canonically known as Chris, when I play the game. And as as a young boy, I experienced Pokemon Crystal's hybridizing style, and I was nurtured by it. And on all my playthroughs, I play as Chris. And that game put me at odds in direct conflict with my family, specifically my father and with my wider community, because I played as a girl. So I was trading and playing with other players. They would tell me, "Oh, you chose the girl," and they would go into all these, derogatory terms. People wouldn't want to talk to me anymore, which it seems like excessive. And even back then, I was like, "What? I don't really understand." It's like an option game, but it's unfortunate. And I think of a recent book that came out, Joseph Earl Thomas Sink, which is a memoir, which he also describes this in detail, how he would play Pokemon. He was obsessed with Pokemon, but because he was a sensitive kid, people would take advantage of that, so they would steal his Pokemon cards, which is an experience that I had as well. And in one very harrowing scene in the book, he's playing Pokemon with his Game Boy on a bus, and somebody steals the Game Boy from him, and then he starts crying, but then he follows the person, but it eventually leads to just a very tough like situation for him. So this culture of violence and toxic masculinity, can lead to like clashes, even when making a decision like this, because you're not creating your avatar, right? You don't have the customizable options that you have in like a lot of modern video games. So prior to playing Pokemon Crystal, most video games that I had access to in the year 2001, reinforced gender binaries or strengthen like patriarchal conceptions. Though by playing the game, I became aware of gender dynamics in a visceral way. And that's it.